And after him I described the mighty Heracles, his phantom, I say. But as for myself, he hath joy at the banquet among the deathless gods, and hath wife to Hebe, of the fair ankles, child of great Zeus, and of Hera, of the golden sandals. And all about him there was a clamor of the dead, as it were fowls flying every way in fear. And he like black night, with bow encased and shaft upon the string, fiercely glancing around, like one in the act to shoot. And about his breast was an awful belt, a baldric of gold, whereon wondrous things were wrought, bears and wild boars and lions with flashing eyes, and strife and battles and slaughters and murders of men. Nay, now that he hath fashioned this, never another may he fashion, who so stored in his craft the device of that belt. And anon he knew me when his eyes beheld me, and making lament he spake unto me winged words. Son of Laertes, of the seed of Zeus, Odysseus of many devices. Ah, wretched one, dost thou too lead such a life of evil doom, as I endured beneath the rays of the sun? I was the son of Zeus Cronion, yet I had trouble beyond measure, for I was subdued unto a man far worse than I, and he enjoined on me hard adventures. Yea, and on a time he sent me hither to bring back the hound of hell, for he devised no harder task for me than this. I lifted the hound and brought him forth from out of the house of Hades, and Hermes sped me on my way in the grey-eyed Athena. Therewith he departed again into the house of Hades, but I abode there still, if perchance some one of the hero folk beside might come, who died in old time. Yea, and I should have seen the men of old, whom I was fain to look on, Theseus and Pirithous, renowned children of the gods. But ere that might be the myriad tribes of the dead thronged up together with wondrous clamor, and the pale fear gat hold of me, lest the high goddess Persephone should send me the head of the Gorgon, that dread monster from out of Hades. Straightway then I went to the ship, and bade my men mount the vessel and loose the hawsers. So speedily they went on board and sat upon the benches, and the wave of the flood bore the bark down on the stream of Oceanus. We rowing first, and afterwards the fair wind was our convoy. Well, thus concludes our little vacation in the underworld, the house of Hades. Odysseus moving on to see even more heroes down here. Heracles or Hercules, depending on your preference. Very quick passing reference to Theseus and Pirithous. And another mention also of the Gorgon's head, which is obviously very popular from the Perseus story. Finally, Odysseus retreats with his men, get on the boat, row, and then find a favorable wind to drive them away from the underworld. Hercules stopping to have a little convo with Odysseus is, I think, worth pulling out here, because I'm still wrapping my head around this. You tell me if I have this wrong, but we know Hercules himself has been invited into Olympus in his afterlife, and yet he still has a shade here in Hades. I looked into this a little bit, and instead of telling you all yet again that I'm not the expert, I'm more going to put it to you and say, if you have better information on this, this is something I'm particularly interested in. So I would love a deeper understanding of this. But here's what I've got a little bit. This dichotomy of Hercules being both in Olympus and the underworld presents, a sort of unorganized understanding of quote unquote the soul, and the soul itself being something that I think comes much later. So we kind of have to strip away our understanding of what it even means to be a person with a identity and memory and personality and psychology. These are all very modern ideas compared to this text, at least. So what I can kind of understand is that here in the underworld, there's a sort of repeating image or phantom of Hercules, of all of these people, that is different than his being, and not his like body, but his essence living amongst the gods at Olympus. And there's a sort of scholarly explanation for how he can be in both places at once that is very typical of Greek mythology, in that one story of Hercules probably has a more traditional death, whereas future stories try to add that Olympian qualification, uh, perhaps during this kind of era of writing these heroes, wanting to give them heroic deaths and honor and reward after life, and that both of these stories, these versions of the stories, have reached us, and therefore they're contradictory, and we don't try to resolve them. We just acknowledge that they both exist. And as you can imagine, I've talked a little bit earlier in this book about the idea of mind, body, soul connection, and the Greeks and ancient civilizations having much different understanding of those things than we do. Like when I was talking about the blood earlier and how that gives people back their memory and whatnot. Homeric poetry and ideas of this time have different words and different functions uh, for things that don't equate 100% to using terms like mind, body, soul. I'm going to do my best to pronounce these. I don't think I have a good grapple on these, but I've already mentioned psyche, and the short definition of these I will read after the word. Um, Psyche, the life that departs at death and continues as a shade. That's what Odysseus is seeing of all these people down here. Thymos is the emotion, the appetite, courage, impulse, the inner struggle of a person. Nous is the recognition, the understanding, intention, perception. Uh, I know I'm oversimplifying these things. I'm sure that essays could be written about each of these individually. Uh, and Pherenes, which is the bodily center of thought and emotion, and was often associated with the chest or diaphragm, unlike nowadays when we think about thought and emotion coming from the head. Or some people have separated emotion in the chest and head with the thought. However, before you start picturing a sort of Pixar's Inside Out of all these different little tiny individual types of souls inside a single person, they're really just different ways of describing all of the embodied things that make a human being in action. So, like a warrior may speak to his thymos, or lose his menos, or conceal something in his pherenes, which sounds like a euphemism. But Homer, or the collection of Homer, or the writers and storytellers of this time, don't have like a pure conscious soul or operating force within the body. And that's kind of an interesting thought now that I'm thinking about it. I think a lot of modern theology, religion, has us believing that there are separate things going on with ourselves. I mean, even if you don't subscribe to religion, how often do you talk about your mind being a separate thing from your body? I know I even fall under that. I'm not particularly religious. Well, I'm not religious at all. But I 100% fall under the categorization of acknowledging my brain and thoughts as something completely separate from my body. You can imagine, and maybe you have experience with your own religion, talking about your soul as something separate from your body and maybe separate from your mind and thoughts, and those things being in tension with each other. I think that at this time, my understanding is that this is a much more integrated unity of flesh and breath. The winged words, we talked about that, and blood and emotion and perception and action. It's all like one thing that at death, that unity fractures and comes apart. So when someone dies, what survives is the psyche, or the image, the likeness that makes up the shade that Odysseus keeps seeing. And one thing that kind of resolves my confusion about uh the idea of the shade sometimes remembering and sometimes not having memory and recognition of like Odysseus specifically, but just generally, I think comes from this idea that the psyche just being an image or likeness and not like a complete living integrated person, is that with that their consciousness is diminished, and that fracturing of the body at death creates a sort of inconsistency in their recall. So they remember, the names of their family and maybe how they died, their relationships, their anger, if you're Aias, um, their heroic reputations and legacies like Achilles and Agamemnon, maybe a lot of their former lives. So that is not saying that death is erasing their identity, but there's no physical nature to them, as we remember Odysseus trying to hug Anticlea, that make memory being integrated into that physical being while they're alive active. When Circe sends Odysseus to the underworld here to get the prophecy from Tiresias, there's a reason for that, and that's that Persephone has allowed Tiresias alone, him by himself in the underworld, to retain his nous, which is his full mental understanding that he had during life, and separates him from all the other shades just flittering about. And so the sacrificial blood that Odysseus gives in this chapter maybe strengthens that interaction that Tiresias and these other shades have with the living. I think if we look at it through that lens of strengthening an inconsistent and fractured person, it goes a long way. Not that we have to solve these things, but it goes a long way to the inconsistencies between Tiresias and Anticlea and Elpenor, everyone who has a slightly different experience with or without the blood helps us, better understand why that is. Okay. Anything else we need to look at here? Yeah. One more thing, just to wrap up some of the key themes of book 11 here. I think Homer is pulling out a number of things, and I find this fascinating because you look at the epoch of the gods, and they're almost parables and fables meant to teach us lessons and explain the world around us. And the heroic age here is really um, bringing in a lot of nuance and gray areas. And I find this chapter to be so interesting because you have characters like Achilles and Agamemnon that are contradicting a little bit of what came before. It was seen as an honor to be granted immortality or remembrance by the gods. You think of, even the stories that are punishments of sorts, like Narcissus or Echo, where those are tragic experiences, perhaps fitting in Narcissus' case, but a lot of those early stories end with the god saying, and forevermore, this is, why and how you will be. Echo, forevermore, you will only be able to, you'll always have the last word, but never be able to say anything other than the last words of what the person before you said. So granting a sort of immortality. Here, though, in the heroic age, and this chapter particularly, Achilles and Agamemnon show that life is more than that glory. And Achilles specifically saying that he would have preferred a humble life to the greatest status among the dead. And one further, I think, with Agamemnon, who does kind of covet glory, is acknowledging that it's not all it's cracked up to be in its own way. Because when he reaches home, expecting to be greeted with that, ticker tape parade, he's killed. And so he's kind of indicating to Odysseus that you need to adjust what your expectations are of going home. This entire quest that you're on, homecoming is different than arriving. So forget the big parade, arrive cautiously and set aside your thoughts of glory and honor if you want to survive. I think that taking both Agamemnon and Achilles there is very subtly saying and giving it forewarning to Odysseus. Don't worry about the wrong things in life. They're going to lead to your ruin. And I think we need to talk a little bit about the prophecy, the words, the roadmap that Tiresias gives to Odysseus, because we've lost that a lot because Tiresias came so early in the book before we actually start to see it come to fruition. Essentially, Tiresias is giving a warning that's a bit more immediate than and explicit than Achilles and Agamemnon give. Tiresias is warning about restraint, keeping control. Let's just go down the list of what he has told Odysseus, as I'm certain it's going to come into play for the rest of this book. Essentially confirms that Poseidon is persecuting him for blinding Polyphemus, that once they leave the underworld here, Odysseus and his crew have to control themselves on Thrinacia. I believe I pronounced that incorrectly, but deal with me. Where they're going to encounter some sacred cattle of Helios. They have to leave them untouched because if they spare the cattle, they'll all eventually reach Ithaca, though yet there's still more suffering to come. But if they kill the cattle, then Odysseus's ship and entire crew will be destroyed, leaving only Odysseus alive. When Odysseus reaches Ithaca, he's going to find all the wooers at home, and he's going to have to make a choice to kill them openly or through some sort of deception. And that his journey home doesn't quite end there. After and if he defeats the wooers, Odysseus has to carry that big oar across the land until he reaches people who know nothing of the sea, in which he's then going to have to make peace with Poseidon through sacrifice and all kinds of other rituals. And if he does all of that, then he will eventually die peacefully with happy people around him in his old age. So that gives us the roadmap moving forward. And that concludes Book 11. As a reminder, with our new format, if you are listening daily as these episodes are being released, I'm taking 1 week off between chapters. So join me here in 1 week when we start up Book 12. If you are not listening daily, then I'll see you tomorrow or in like 30 seconds when the next episode starts. But I am so glad you're all here. I'm so glad to be back after that long hiatus. I don't think there is anything going to be preventing us from concluding the rest of the Odyssey. Of course, if you want to get in touch, you can always reach out to me over at patreon.com/gruntworkpod, where you can join for free, get a bunch of cool stuff, or you can contribute, listen to the ads at the end of these episodes. And I've even included a post over there for you to be able to suggest some ideas for stories that we can do after we're done with the Odyssey. So, with that, I will see you all in either 1 week or 30 seconds. Until then, okay, goodbye. Odyssey is part of the Gruntwork Podcast Network. The show is produced, edited, and hosted by Landon Solano. The original text of The Odyssey, written by Homer. Theme song by Neuroflow. You can support this show and other shows like it by going to patreon.com/gruntworkpod. Thank you for listening. See you tomorrow.